of Oriental and African Studies, where I was a professor and director of Research Center for 20 years. We regret that the pro-director is ill and cannot be here to welcome everyone. So completely unofficially and without the necessary authority, I'll welcome you all to SOAS this evening for this excellent event. And I will now pass over to Patrick Allen, Chairman of the Progressive Economy Forum, to take it further. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Hello, good evening, and welcome from the Progressive Economy Forum. So my name is Patrick Allen, I'm the chair. I'm delighted to welcome you on behalf of the forum to this lecture by Will Hutton, one of the UK's most eminent writers on economics and the state, author of many books, including the best-selling The State We're In, and he is, of course, a passionate Remainer. Right, GDPR warning, we're filming and taking photographs, so if you don't want to appear in any pictures, can you tell the photographer and drop us an email, and we'll make sure that you're not put up on our website. So first, a brief word about PEF, and apologies to those who may have heard some of this before. The forum was launched in May this year. It's a forum of progressive economists who have come together determined to devise an economic program for the country and to help people come to a better understanding of economics and the principles which create the conditions for a stable and prosperous economy. We have recruited a distinguished council of eminent economists and academics, which of course includes Will Hutton and many other well-known names. Recent recruit, Nobel Prize winner Joe Stiglitz. We hope to put him into the lecture series at some point. So, why have we done this? We are passionate about macroeconomics as a force for good. We are appalled at the damage being done to the health and well-being of the country due to misguided and harmful economic policy, which shows no sign of stopping. We're concerned that a false narrative has persuaded many people that these policies, these harmful policies, are necessary. I refer to three relevant events: the 2008 crash, the 2010 austerity programme, still ongoing, and this leading to the 2016 referendum and its aftermath. They have all contributed immense damage to our economy and prosperity. The global financial crisis was caused by a deregulated financial sector, not, I hasten to add, by excessive public spending in the UK by the Labour government. In the UK, the GDP shrank by 6%, unemployment rose by nearly 1 million. Worldwide, over $2 trillion of assets were written down, and we're still living with the consequences, which in fact led to austerity imposed in 2010 by Cameron and Osborne, ostensibly to reduce our alleged unmanageable debt, but it has caused the slowest recovery from recession in history. It's hard to get a joke into an economics talk, but last week Theresa May said that austerity is over. She should point this out to the residents of Northampton, whose council is practically bankrupt. And she said there was no going back to uncontrolled spending. But there never was uncontrolled spending. We rescued the banks after the crash. The crash caused a temporary and expected rise in the deficit, which is an automatic stabiliser. Pre-crash spending by Labour was similar to most advanced economies, and the Tories in opposition at that time announced that they would match it when they came to power. Austerity shows no sign of ending, and where there are savage cuts ahead in benefits and public spending. It's misguided, it's been tried many times before. Trying the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, said Einstein, is a sign of insanity. It does not increase confidence in the economy, it reduces it. Austerity does not reduce public debt, it increases it and suppresses growth. The slump is the worst possible time to cut government spending. As Robert Skidelsky put it recently, the rhetoric supporting this policy of deficit cutting in a slump gets almost no support from economic theory. PEF Council member Simon Wren-Lewis has calculated that the cost of austerity from 2010 to 2018 is 15% of GDP, or 2 trillion, or £10,000 per household. 1.5 million children will be pushed into poverty by 2021. Homelessness has risen by 169%. The Guardian today reported 440 homeless people died last year in the UK. Funding for local authorities has been cut by 49% since 2010. But at the same time, public sector net debt has increased from 64% to 85%. Veteran British economist Robert Neild was quoted by William Keegan in The Observer this Sunday. Neild said, "In Britain, public services are falling apart. Our health and social care services are deteriorating. Crime rates are soaring, and so are violence and suicide in prisons. The quality of our schools is uneven and unfair. State pensions are miserly. Poverty and homelessness are increasing. On all sides, we are confronted by social injustice and economic neglect." Austerity kills, as Larry Elliott said in The Guardian on Monday. In November last year, an article in the BMJ concluded that severe public spending cuts were associated with 120,000 deaths between 2010 and 2017. Our council member, Danny Dorling, comments that 110 years of steadily improving life expectancy in the UK are now officially over, and we can expect 1 million earlier deaths to happen across the UK in the next 40 years. And so austerity has led to Brexit. Research at the University of Warwick found that the welfare cuts under the coalition government had a decisive impact on the Brexit vote. They argued that austerity was responsible for as much as a 10% point swing in favour of leave, thus tipping the outcome. According to Simon Wren-Lewis, the economy is 2.5% smaller than it would have been without that vote. PEF is opposed to deregulation of the financial sector, which caused the crash, and we are opposed to austerity. We say there is a better way to run the economy with active government intervention. We would improve sustainability and the green economy, innovation, investment in people and infrastructure to create full employment with meaningful jobs. By reducing inequality, we would address the left-behind areas of coastal towns and former industrial areas. We would take the best models from other countries. In this way, the economy can be prosperous and stable. Key to this is education, to help people, especially parliamentarians and those in the media, to understand the fundamentals of how the economy works. We will show that the budget of the country bears no relation to the budget of the economy, of the country. Because if the government is responsible for 40% of GDP, then cuts to its spending, the economy falls back, receipts will drop, and debt will rise. We're devising a programme of lectures. This is our second. Policy documents, discussions with politicians, and materials to explain economics. We will help to draft policy with progressive politicians. Our council will provide credibility for the next government which implements those policies. John Maynard Keynes was the greatest economist who ever lived, and he is the guide to much of our thinking. Tonight, Will Hutton addresses the single most important issue facing the country, Brexit. He needs no introduction to most of you. He has written extensively about the state of the nation and the economy. He was the editor of The Observer. He still writes a fortnightly column. He is the principal of Hertford College. His new book, Saving Britain, I hope is outside on sale. He has analysed why so many people voted for Brexit and what must be done to address their complaints. Over to you, Will.
Well, I've written this out, and this is a great honour, of course, because I usually do this just off a few notes on the back of an envelope, and let's see how it goes writing it out. So, to kick off, Britain is at a fundamental crossroads. The next few months are the most important in my and your adult lives. The referendum result has thrown the country into an intensifying, bloodless civil war, because so much is at stake. Essentially, an idea of Britain as tolerant, open, and proud of its Europeanness on the one hand, and on the other, Britain in pretense that it can turn its back on Europe and build a closed, but yet free market global country in a world of gathering protection. What persuaded millions to back an act of self-harm was less their belief in the anti-European case, but rather a collective view that whatever else, the status quo could not hold. Its inequalities and the sheer desperation of many lives could not be allowed to continue. They were right. But the solution is not to leave the EU. Our problems, as I'm going to try and show tonight, are made in Britain. They can only be solved in Britain. We need a credible, radical prospectus for change to persuade millions of leavers to call for that, rather than imagine Brexit will solve their problems. Any vote now or in the future will hang on us being able to convince them of that. Already, the economic costs of even the unstable halfway house that Mrs. May is negotiating are clear and mounting. The EU, 27 countries, 31 trade deals, and another 30 being ratified, anchors the world rules-based trading system, not the poor, broken-backed, feeble World Trade Organization that is down to its last 3 judges, and if Trump doesn't nominate one, could actually be illicit going forward. Every time you hear a Brexiter on Radio 4 talking about leaving, having a hard Brexit on WTO rules, reflect there may not be a WTO to implement those rules, and it doesn't even police them. We are leaving certain trade with half of the world, around which our remaining great companies are dependent, for uncertain trade with the rest, and especially unfriendly to what we're good at, services. And then there is the single market. The EU's effort to hammer out common non-tariff standards to trade along with mutual recognition. The world of tariffs, now on average around 5%, is not the issue in trade. The issue in trade is non-tariffs, which are worth around 20% of costs. EU standards on those non-tariffs have become global standards, and Britain was a major playmaker in setting those standards. It was a highly democratic process. The EU's democracies came together democratically to hammer out rules which then became and are becoming global standards. Think pesticides, think mobile phones, think the GDPR that Patrick just read out before we began the lecture. We got sovereignty, the benefits of trade, and democracy. Companies like our own Vodafone became global leaders. Inward investment soared. There's already a cold grip getting colder. Investment in the car industry has plunged by 2/3, I repeat, 2/3, in just 3 years, as car makers anticipate a world in which they manufacture outside the customs union and outside the standard setters' borders. Toyota, JLR and BMW have all said the future of their UK operations is in doubt. Airbus now says it's a Franco-German Spanish company. It is actively considering contingency arrangements to exit the UK. Banks are moving their decision-making units to the EU. We run the risks, but we lose the decision makers. Pharma, satellites, the poultry industry, for God's sake, the creative industries, the music industry, universities, all are or will be hit. It's obvious that the combination of less trade and less investment will cost the economy dear, hence the range of pessimistic forecasts from all but the Brexit camp, whose models ignore the impact of standard setting, non-tariff barriers and distance. But here's perhaps a bigger point to say in economic lecture. As seriously we detach ourselves from the economic bloc that sustains defence and security interests in Europe, and an equally important battle within Europe over whether it sustains the values of the Enlightenment. We should be alongside the best in Europe as they fight the dark forces of nativism, right-wing populism that borders on crypto-fascism. Instead, we are fleeing the site of battle, imagining there is a better world in the arms of President Xi, Trump and Modi, or that we can take on Putin or America's technopolists better ourselves. It's mad, it's self-delusory. Why then the vote? The overriding reason is that Britain has grown ruinously unequal. Education, living standards, health and the chance to express oneself through meaningful work all have become a treacherous lottery. Too many towns and cities contain conspicuous, semi-barren wastelands. Inequalities, both in national and international terms, are breathtaking. I just put a slide together. 7 out of the 10 poorest regions in Northern Europe are in England. 7 out of the 10. With per capita incomes as low as parts of Bulgaria and Romania, or Mississippi. All 27 local authority areas that suffered property price declines voted Brexit. All 100 areas the smallest house price increased, 93 voted Brexit. 8 out of 10 local authorities with the lowest wages voted leave. Where there was least demand to live, people voted Brexit. In left behind Britain, social mobility has juddered to a halt. In Westminster, they are 63% of free school meal kids achieved A star to C. But down in the Isle of Wight, the number drops to 27%, not the recipients of the big increase in educational spending that happened in London's 29 boroughs. Cambridge and Chelsea, look at that. How many of disadvantaged kids have managed to get to university? Not the story in coastal towns like Hastings or Eastbourne, or indeed a place like Barnsley in Yorkshire, where only 10% get to university. The Social Mobility Commission under Alan Milburn identified 30 social mobility cold spots. Every single one voted leave. And last but not least, there's what actually the American doctors call shit life syndrome. This is when a patient walks into your surgery and actually declares they're phenomenally depressed, but the objective conditions in which they live are depressing. Small wonder they need antidepressants. Extraordinary rise in antidepressant prescriptions in England. Look at that, Blackpool, nearly a third of the adult population are antidepressants. Voted Brexit. Brent, 71 out of 1,000. And here's as astonishing, and this was mentioned by Patrick in his opening address, life expectancy in 5 big English regions, which coterminous actually, with being the poorest regions in Northern Europe, suffered life expectancy declines in the run-up to the referendum. And just look at the differences in the kind of richer and poorer parts of the country. Deaths from liver disease alone, caused by alcohol abuse and obesity, are 8 times higher per 100,000 in Blackpool than in South Norfolk. Half the country, our fellow citizens, never visit a dentist. Sales of DIY dental kits, self-administering dental treatment. You actually, you self-administer the anesthetic and then you self-administer the filling, are booming. In all those areas, the Brexit vote was extraordinarily high. Leave votes didn't know the numbers, but they could certainly feel the social facts they represented. The Brexit vote shone a much-needed spotlight on the way that Britain, especially England, has become economically and socially broken. Your life chances, your quality of life depend on where you were born and where you live. Place has ever more firmly dictated destiny. The referendum called time on it all. Now, what about this story about job generation? It does look impressive in raw numbers. The unemployment rate's halved over the last 7 years, but actually the slumping quality of jobs, work and living standards has been disastrous. A 10.4% fall in real wages in the 8 years after 2007 was not only the biggest and longest on record, but the worst alongside Greece amongst leading industrialized countries. Permanent jobs have been replaced by transient contractualized work. Everyone in this audience knows that story, the gig economy, the rise of self-employment, etc., zero-hour contracts. But 30% of adults were in poverty for at least 1 year between 2012 and 2015, and 4.6 million working adults in a state of persistent poverty. And it's been borrowing that squared the circle. Household debts returning to the levels of the pre-2008 financial crisis. At the same time, there's been an immense, of course, you know the story, income accruing to the top. The top 1% have more than doubled their share of income over the last 35 years to 8.6%. And then there's the austerity. I mean, Patrick's run through some of the numbers, but one that actually astonishes me is between 2010 and 2020, per capita spending on public services will have fallen by a quarter. Of course, health, allegedly, education and defence were offered some protection, but the cuts elsewhere have been close to incredible. And what's been happening, for example, to legal aid, what's happening in our prisons, is actually a stain on a civilized society. Food banks have become a proxy for the combined effect. 2016, the year of the referendum, was the 9th successive year in which food bank demand increased. So this unholy cocktail, we were the first to industrialize, and we never managed to change the economic model of many of those towns. Structural change, the rise of the knowledge economy, the financial crisis that's been referred to, the assault on public services, it came together in an existential moment on June the 23rd of 2016. And the genius, crooked genius, of the Eurosceptic right was to take none of the blame for any of that, but to offload it instead onto the EU and immigration. Now, I'm hoping that there will be a people's vote in the next 6 months. There may not be. If after March 29th, the debate about the half-in, half-out nature of the deal that Mrs May is going to strike with the European Union, some on the left of the Tory party are already calling it BINO, Brexit in name only, and the European Reform Group is going to go on, and the debate within the Labour Party is going to go on. The issue is not going to be settled on March 29th, one way or another. There will, I think, in the years ahead, whatever happens in the next 6 months, be an urgent debate in this country about what kind of capitalism, what kind of society, and what kind of relationship we want with Europe, the continent of which we are part and whose values we share. And so I think we have to really not only make the case which the Progressive Economic Forum does against austerity, but to make also a deeper case about what kind of capitalism informed by kind of Keynesian ideas. The building block of the Brexit Thatcherite case for leaving the European Union, never forget Nigel Lawson, just a few months after the referendum results, saying, now is the opportunity to complete the Thatcherite revolution, he wrote in the Financial Times in September 2016, is the belief that markets self-organize spontaneously for the common good, and that self-reliant individuals should stand on their own 2 feet in all circumstances. The state should be as small as possible. But it's a fundamental kind of contention that actually social justice and prosperity do not emerge spontaneously from self-organizing markets and individualism. That is the heart of Keynesianism. For all the self-serving bromides about the success of Britain's modern economy, the everyday truth is that too much of British capitalism performed badly. There are too few great companies, too few sectors or industries where Britain can claim world leadership, and on top there's a very sparse middle ground. Our medium-sized business sector, what the Germans call the Mittelstand, the bedrock of its social market economy, is comparatively small in Britain because of financial short-termism, cultural factors. We don't believe in building businesses and creating value. We believe in extracting value, and the lack of public institutions to support growth. What's astonishing, look at the British financial system, is there's hardly any public actors in it. In particular, the UK, in an era of the digital economy and digitalisation, has virtually no indigenous high-tech companies of any size, only Sage in the FTSE 100. Now, my starting point to put this right is this proposition. The capitalist firm is of necessity a social organisation. entrepreneurialism is not about a succession of individualistic, sole buccaneer traders having light bulb moments that can only turn into successful businesses if there is minimal regulation and minimal tax. Wealth creation, innovation, and productivity growth reside in the much more complicated business of marshalling people and resources with lots of compromises and trade-offs in substantive institutions that work better the stronger the shared social glue and shared sense of purpose. We have too few organizations like that. And of course, they have to be embedded in a supportive ecosystem, which perforce must be publicly designed and must be primed with public money. This means organizations being animated by more than simply making profits. Crucial though that is the life of the enterprise, it's purpose that comes first. So, purpose, for example, to create the happiness of its members, John Lewis, or, in the example of IKEA, to create a better everyday life for the many, brings a unity of vision around which the firm can group and manage all the competing claims on it. Shareholders, customers, employees, all of whom contribute to the wealth generation process. Purpose forms a kind of North Star, a network of values that hold the company together in good times and bad, allowing commitment to innovation and investment on the basis of that long-run success. But that poses something else. It's the key to building any sustainable business. Because a company that's going to endure over time must meet a human demand, and that demand needs to be recurrent. And that means it can't be a vehicle solely to enrich those at the top, resisting all other stakeholders' claims as legitimate. It has to have a relationship with the society in which it trades. It's a fundamental axiom. To create those companies, the core of stakeholder capitalism, there needs to be a challenge, the very concept, the very British concept of a public limited company, which is public only in a sense it's quoted on a stock exchange. Beyond that, they have no public mission and no public duties. So, proposition 1, British companies should be required by law to declare their purpose in accessible company constitutions, to report regularly to their owners, the public, and to appropriate regulatory bodies, and how they're fulfilling those purposes. The 2006 Company Act that provides for all this is simply too limp, too soft. Part of this will be a new commitment on pay. Every company's remuneration committee should include employee representatives, and it should publish a fair pay report. The senior executives' pay should be identified and differentials talked about, rationale behind their incentives explained. The whole thing should be transparent and on the table. To make any of this happen requires anchored shareholders who embrace that vision and new pools of capital from which it can be drawn. In Germany and Scandinavia, companies typically have a few core anchor shareholders, block holders, and they constitute the mass of the voting rights. And they are the loyalists. Even in America, a so-called, the bastion of Anglo-Saxon capitalism enjoys block holders on a German and Scandinavian scale. It's just the Brits who have these ownerless corporations with a shareholder base that's the most fragmented and selfish in the industrialized West. We should use every pool in the policy locker, tax, regulation, law, new pools of capital, to foster more block holders. It should be them who vote on takeovers when companies get taken over, not the motley bunch of arbitrageurs and hedge fund jackals who recently settled the great engineering company GKN's fate when it was bid for by the asset strippers of that specialist asset stripping company Melrose, whose executives paid, by the way, is north of 100 million per director. We need radically to recreate and expand alternative versions of ownership. Robert Skidelsky, my old friend in this series, made a powerful case in the first lecture in this series for readopting Keynes as our guiding light in macroeconomic policy. But he also got important things to say about the organization of capitalism itself. In his 1926 essay against laissez-faire, Keynes argued for the creation of semi-autonomous bodies within the state, bodies whose criterion of action with their own field is solely the public good as they understand it. He was appealing for the creation not of state-owned and directed companies on the model of Attlee's nationalizations, but for something more plural, smaller, autonomous organizations, partially, maybe even completely privately owned, but importantly, publicly directed, with constitutions committed to the public good as their primary purpose. So borrowing from Keynes, third proposition, I propose a new generation of public benefit companies tasked in their constitutions to pursue environmental, social, or political objectives. The state would have to do, if it was a utility company, a water company, the best water possible, or in the BBC's case, to stick to its knitting with informing, educating, and entertaining. That would be their purpose. I wouldn't spend 170 billion or more on nationalising these utilities. A stakeholder government could take a foundation share in each utility, requiring them to become a public benefit company, declaring their purpose to promote the public good while making a reasonable surplus, and that's that. That would combine the best of the public and private sectors. We shouldn't stop there. Employee ownership in Britain is paltry. Mutually owned employee ownership trusts could employ 3 million people in 10 years if we get the incentives right. And I'd better that route with compulsion as a last resort, in my view. Cooperatives, mutuals, should be multiplied to employ over 1 million, especially if you get a state development bank to support them financially. And we should develop a constitutional template for a pure stakeholder company that builds the participation of consumers, employees, and supply chains into its management and governance. The pure, devil take the hindmost, short-term, share price maximizing firm should become a minority form in our capitalism. Nor do wages have to be so low in an expanding world of face-to-face companies in the service sector, ranging from hospitals to supermarkets. I mean, the productivity in these sectors is appallingly low, much lower than in France and Germany, and wages are rock bottom. We should require the firms in these sectors, more actually than other sectors, to take to heart that they own a purpose around which they should animate their people, train them, pay them reasonably, and recognize trade unions. They should incorporate as stakeholder companies, mutuals, cooperatives, and employer ownership trusts. And here's the point. Ownership is a serious business. The PLC in Britain has become an ownerless form. We need our owners, and we have a £7 trillion asset management industry to take ownership responsibilities seriously. We don't talk about the asset management industry in this country. But it doesn't remotely take the job of stewardship seriously. Long-term stewardship company is not in the mainstream culture, business model, or legal obligations of the owners of British shares and the asset managers who manage share portfolios. So, asset managers too should be required to declare their purposes and report regularly as a minimum. And we should beef up the Financial Reporting Council into a proper business and asset management regulator, and it should be given real teeth. We've got to reshape the financial system to support all this. Local authority pension funds are being merged to create super funds. They should only give mandates to investment managers who subscribe to these stakeholder objectives. Private sector pension funds, the defined benefit pension funds are going. It's all defined contribution funds now, offloading the risk of paying a final salary to us, the beneficiaries. But they're booming. If we kind of mandate them to have a fifth of their portfolio in 2030 in purposeful companies, in stakeholder companies, that would be a pool of equity finance of 100 billion. And they perform better, these companies, than non-purpose companies. I'm a believer in creating a citizens' wealth fund. All these public assets that are sold, and if we dispose of the shares in RBS, that's an obvious candidate. Along with, I would have a tax on dividends, a scrip tax. This is the IPPR's Economic Justice Report. It's a straight lift from there. Thank you, Tom Cabassi and the Archbishop of Canterbury and co. We can create a big, big fund. And like the sovereign wealth funds of Norway and Singapore, this fund will be managed in Keynesian style by an independent board as an autonomous organization on behalf of the public. And it could become the provider of blockholder finance. A new national infrastructure bank could also be created to provide long-term loans to support infrastructure spending. But we've got to reshape the financial system. Proposition 4. And we've got to say something about data and the digital revolution. I mean, we need to trust firms who use our data. Better trust them if they're incorporated as stakeholder companies. I would require Google, Facebook, to put their digital platforms in the UK, to have a subsidiary, a UK subsidiary, which incorporates as a public benefit company, so that we can actually trust that what's actually happening to the data that they have on our behalf and how it's used. I also think our universities can be, they will also provide lots of startups and spin-ups in this digital high-tech world. And we've got a best university system in the world for an economy of our size. And again, I'm with Mariana Mazzucato in actually saying, Mazzucato, sorry, I mispronounced her name, the entrepreneurial state. Let's actually get these universities and let's get them with sufficient R&D support, cascade the kind of innovation, housed and fostered by newly devolved cities and towns, integrating new regional powerhouses that are serious university brain hubs. Just imagine if we got serious about spending public money on the same scale as HS2 on space, raw materials, artificial intelligence, just a few examples. And when I speak, remember that China has committed to spend 700 billion, repeat, 700 billion pounds on R&D by 2030. Now, the figures we spend are just paltry by comparison. Yes, on top of this, we've got to be tough on the new technopolists. I don't like to see what Facebook and Google are doing with their market power. Google's Eric Schmidt has famously acknowledged that actually Google, in buying 200 companies, well below the threshold for any kind of competition intervention, are adopting what they call the kill in the crib strategy, taking out fast-growing high-tech companies and assimilating them into the Google octopus. Again, our competition authorities are asleep, not dynamically thinking about where the market will be in 3-5 years' time, and actually allowing these high-tech companies to take out challenges is fundamentally anti-competitive. And here I have to say, congratulations to the European Union and the Danish Competition Commissioner. I mean, she has been the most aggressive challenger to Google, levying stunning fines on their anti-competitive behavior. The notion, the Jacob Rees-Mogg, Boris Johnson notion, that actually the UK can confront them better than the European Union is, again, purblind, fanciful nonsense. No single European state can hope to achieve attacking that market power by itself. We've got to do something about what's happening to the labour market. And here, I'm a passionate believer in reinventing the trade union. Market power, I mean, some of the numbers are just amazing. I mean, did you know, any of you, that the union membership in the hospitality sector, bars, restaurants and hotels, one of the biggest sectors in the economy, is just 2.5%? 2.5%? Small wonder that that's an area where gig economy wages, minimum wages are kind of just the rule. So we have to, I would like to kind of make an appeal for us to kind of start talking about a new forms of unionism, stakeholder unionism, in which the unions actually kind of are simultaneously, they may hold shares on their members' behalves, they may employ them as employee mutuals and hire them out actually in this crazed market. I'm strongly behind the John McDonnell programme for reinventing collective bargaining. Above all, we have to say that trade unions are a legitimate form of social organisation because there is such a thing as society. The stakeholder conception is that firms are not independent from society as wealth creators from on high, for which they should be rewarded with tax cuts, deregulation and fat salaries. Rather, they are integral to society, symbiotically connected. Firms need society, we of course need them, but the relationship is reciprocal. Equally, the constitutional state, checked, balanced, bound by the rule of law, accountable and democratically elected, is not our enemy. It is the public actor that strengthens reciprocal bonds between individuals, institutions, firms, and the community. There is no strong society without a strong and accountable state implementing a strong social contract, period. Decades of being told the state is a priori bad and the private is a priori good has left Britain with a disbelief that any but last-ditch public action before an obvious emergency is justifiable, and with a weak social contract. We need a strong one. Thus, all the ails and ills that I've described earlier on. And thus, the joke, of course, and to pick up on Patrick said, that we're ending austerity. It's still projected to decline as a portion of GDP. The IFS has said just to hold spending the same in real terms requires tax increases of 40 billion. The new story is not so much the deficit, but actually trying to get the national debt stable. But of course, debt targets are irrational. As Robert said, argued a couple of weeks back, with the lowest interest rates for the best part of 300 years, and government bonds 14 years on average in duration, virtually the same length as a mortgage, for God's sake, and debt to GDP ratios have been higher for most of the last 300 years. Britain emphatically does not have a public debt problem, nor are fair taxes, higher taxes on the wealthy and corporations as a source of likely to harm growth. And the IMF has found little evidence, virtually no evidence, that where the wealthy are higher taxes, income tax, tax evasion is closed down, inheritance taxes are high, any of those things do not induce lower growth rates. Nor is there any evidence that lower corporation tax boosts investment in growth. It's all, the prohibition on tax argument is essentially a plea, and I guess you all know this, to enrich the rich, not an argument for efficiency, let alone justice. So here's another kind of building block of the capitalism and social contract we need to see. We have to have a root and branch overhaul of our tax system. Residential property values, the equity alone is worth over 6 billion, absurdly have not been revalued since 1991. And property valued over £320,000 pays no additional tax whatever. Those bans have been the same for 27 years. We need to revalue. That's the kind of thing that happens in Mauritania or Latin American republics. It's actually not what should happen in a sophisticated democracy like ours. We need a revaluation, of course. We need a reform of the council tax. We need to ensure that property tax evasion is outlawed. Development gains should be pocketed not by property developers. There should be development gains tax. There should be a land value tax on the market value of land as it rises. And that should permit us to build a wave of new towns. One of the reasons why property prices are so high is the last new town that was built was Milton Keynes 50 years ago. Inheritance tax has become a voluntary tax, a death tax, the right call it. They say it deters enterprise because the chief impulse of any entrepreneur is to pass his or her wealth onto their children. I have never met anybody at the top of a quoted company launching a startup, doing a spin-out, who has said that their objective in doing this is to pass their wealth onto their grandchildren. Never. Their aim is to build a great company, to kind of leave the world better than it was before. The impulse to succeed in life is not to ensure that your children never work. The yield, it's only a 5 billion yield on inheritance tax against 6 billion of equity in residential property, should at least be doubled. And the tax should not be called a death tax, but we share in your good luck tax. There are lots of other fair taxes. VAT on financial services, environmental harm should be taxed, the use of plastics, disposable coffee cups, all should be taxed. We should raise tax on those earning over 150,000 a year, cut to 45%. It could at least be 50, if not higher. Together, these sources of fair taxation would yield tens of billions. And that could be used to cut taxes on the poor, fund a new social contract on health, education, housing, immigration, And when I talk about immigration, I'm talking about kind of mitigating the impact of immigration by investing aggressively in those areas where there are pinch points. Social care for the elderly, under 5 centres. Isn't it amazing that all of that was kind of abolished by the coalition government? The job seekers' allowance should be replaced by proper unemployment benefit paid as of right to those who are unemployed. Homelessness, a blight on a rich and civilized society, should be consigned to history. So much on which we could spend this money. We could have a universal health service. We could have a universal dental system. The New Citizens' Wealth Fund, which together with local government bonds, could fund a revolution in infrastructure and public housing. We can change our country. The National Infrastructure Commission identified a host of projects, HS3, mobile coverage, extending 4G, universal broadband, Crossrail of the North, so much. It could all be done. There is no prohibition except our unwillingness to create the institutions, to channel the credit flows and the tax revenues to fund it. That's all that's required. Will is required. Cities, towns and regions that have left behind Britain need an educational Marshall Plan. I feel very, very strongly about this. There's a yawning gulf between the privileges afforded by the system of elite schools and universities and the chaotic, unsystematic approach to supporting the nearly 500,000 kids every year, teenagers each year, who do not go to university. 500,000. Over the past 30 years, skills policy that has delivered the debacle of our non-training system has been overseen by, wait for this, 65 secretaries of state in 11 different departments in a tragic game of human pass the parcel. England provides decent apprenticeships for less than half the proportion of school leavers compared to Germany, Denmark, Holland and Norway. The apprenticeship levy should of course be tied contractually to a significant increase in number and quality of apprenticeships year by year. It shouldn't be spent, as the government has recently allowed, on Goldman Sachs educating its executives through MBAs. There should be a single lifelong tertiary educational entitlement for every teenager. We should ensure that we have a national network of technical universities. Technical skills and apprenticeships are the Cinderella of England's education and training system. They should be the princesses. And last but not least, the private school system. I think there should be an educational opportunity tax of 25% on private school fees. It would raise 2.5 billion towards this educational Marshall Plan. We could boost teacher pay in hard-to-recruit areas. And every kid in the country should enjoy the wide opportunities that private school pupils take for granted. And part of the income could be used to lower university tuition fees. We can build this stakeholder capitalism. We can have a new social contract. We can reduce poverty. We can boost prosperity. We can create genuine opportunity for all young people across the whole country. We also need, alongside all of this, a better political system. There's not time. Look at Chapter 6 in Saving Britain tonight to spell out that. But in essence, there needs to be a wholesale decentralization of decision-making in our country with attendant economic powers to our cities, towns, nations, and regions. And we need to remake the House of Lords so that their voices are part of the national legislating and governing process. So to conclude, all of this is doable within the European Union. None of it is prohibited by membership of the EU. On top, the European Union solves the trilemma, in Danny Roderick's words, of being able to reconcile democracy, sovereignty, and growing integration into global markets. It anchors the rule-based global trading system. It is the global standard setter. Its preferences for variants of stakeholder capitalism, for the rule of law, for variants of a social contract, for exercising its heft against monopoly and the new technopolists, for enlightenment values, are what our preferences too here in Britain, what the vast majority of our fellow countrywomen and men believe in. On top, by standing together, it provides heft against the United States, China and Russia, all of whom ruthlessly pursue their interests, not the same as ours, often violently against it. It's a force for peace and security, for taming climate change, for helping European citizens live lives they have reason to value, in Amartya Sen's famous formulation. It's not the demonic enemy portrayed by the British right, nor the capitalist club portrayed by some on the left. Left commentators, some of them, cite the EU's treatment of Greece as a reason to be anti the EU. But there's no majority in Greece itself for either leaving the EU or even the euro, despite all the privations through which they've lived. Rather, most Greeks see what has happened as completing the country's journey to become a proper functioning Western economy and democracy, and they like the fact that the Troika insists on taxes being collected. The EU, in short, is a force for European and global good. We must be part of it and help shape it. But to do that, we must earn the trust of millions who were duped into believing it was the cause of their ills. We must reform Britain, commit to reform Britain around these kinds of principles. We must stop Brexit, and we must allow ourselves to become the Europeans our history and our culture require us to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Will. I was writing down words like barnstorming, tour de force, visionary, comprehensive, inspiring. Gosh. Manifesto for the future. We're going to have two commentators now on Will's speech and then some Q&A. The first commentator is Stephanie Griffith-Jones, on my left here. She's a member of our council. She's an international expert on international finance, based at Columbia University, but resident in Britain. She's written a book recently, The Future of National Development Banks. So she's very big on investment banks. So Stephanie, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. This is a great event, and it's a great book. I can really recommend it very, very strongly. I must admit that I've been a fan of Will Hutton for a very long time, and I think all his books are great, but this is perhaps the best. I think the central ideas of the book are two. One, that we should stay in the EU, because it is better economically, and it's better for peace, and it's better for many other reasons. And I completely share that passion. Simultaneously, I think it's a very important insight that to make this country attractive to the majority of people who have done badly is the need to repurpose the economic model and review the social contract, as well as strengthen democracy. And I think the book argues very convincingly for that. And it also explains, I think, very clearly, which hasn't been really explained up to now, how Brexit is basically an extreme right-wing project to finalize the Thatcher revolution. As Will said, it was Nigel Lawson who actually accepted that. And this is a project which wants low tax, low wages, and strong super deregulation of all markets. And this will lead to a continuation of an economy that will be unequal, less dynamic than it could be, and less green. Even the IMF, normally a place of orthodox economics, has recently reminded us that actually if you improve income distribution, you will increase growth. And this is, of course, very much in the spirit of Keynes, who would have said increasing real wages for the majority of the people will increase aggregate demand and therefore increase growth. And even more, dare I say it here in front of Jan Toporowski, who's such an expert on Kalecki, in the spirit of Kalecki, who says, you know, income distribution is the best way of increasing growth and leading to a more equal society. So we have this vision whereby reducing inequality is an essential part of the society. And this kind of extreme right-wing Tory model will not deliver that, will not deliver that. And I think then the book makes the case of designing an alternative economic model for the UK, which Will has described so eloquently. I want to focus on some aspects. One is the fact that free market economics has limitations, because markets, although they have valuable functions, have major imperfections and have major omissions and gaps and insufficiencies. And here I will draw not just on Keynes thinking, who's I'm as big a fan of as Patrick and Will, but also on a book that I modestly co-edited with Stiglitz and José Antonio Campo. We called it Time for the Visible Hand. And the thing is that Stiglitz likes to joke that the reason why you don't see the invisible hand is because maybe it doesn't exist. So if it doesn't exist, you have to replace it with visible hand of government, of a state, which regulates market failures, which complements the private financial system where it has serious gaps. And here is the case, for example, for national development banks in infrastructure, because private markets, even in the UK, do not provide enough long-term finance, for example, for infrastructure, for innovation, for research and development. And those countries like Germany, with their very successful KfW, have a much more successful economy, which a financial system which is much more diversified and which serves much better the real economy. And finally, we need a state, and here again I draw on Mariana Mazzucato, a state that shapes via a vision of the economy, via what are the strategic decisions, shapes the structure of the economy and the structural transformation that is needed to increase productivity and wages. And so such an entrepreneurial state. So we need a state that regulates where there are market failures, that substitutes markets where there are market gaps, and which shapes markets. And I think that, therefore, from this comes also the vision of very large and very important public investment, which, of course, this country under the Tory government has been reducing dramatically under the call of need for increased austerity. And of course, public development banks are another mechanism where governments can leverage resources to channel more finance towards the sectors of great priority. I want to also stress a point that Will already made and is made in the book, but I think is particularly important, why it is important, significant for the UK to stay in the European Union. And this is the idea that the right, and particularly the extreme right in this country, says we have to regain our sovereignty. Trump says we have to make America great again. But the point is, what they don't understand is that by pooling sovereignty, you actually enhance it. By working, if the UK works with France, with Germany, with Italy, with all these countries, it actually gains power vis-à-vis the financial markets, vis-à-vis the multinational corporations, vis-à-vis the countries that we sign trade deals with. And therefore, we pull it also not just with other European countries, but with the European institutions, like the European Investment Bank, like the European Structural Funds. And they can say, look, we want to have a satellite, and we will do that together, jointly. The best scientists, the best European scientists, of whom many are in the UK, the best financial resources, the best research behind it. And therefore, by pooling sovereignty, we gain sovereignty. as I said, we can get better deals, we can get better regulation. For example, if you pool sovereignty, you can have better workers' regulation, regulate better the labor markets to ensure workers' rights. You can regulate the environment. I mean, if some of you have lived in this country for long and you go to the beach, I mean, the beaches are much cleaner in the UK since European regulations come. I don't know how dirty they will be if we leave. You can have better financial regulation, which of course the Brexiteers want to get rid of because they want a deregulated financial sector that will undermine the real economy rather than to support it. So I think that this pooling of sovereignty, as I said, is a contrast with the idea of we will have our British sovereignty. But what they really want is not a sovereignty for all the people. They want the freedom to be able to deregulate financial markets, to deregulate capital flows and the financial sector furthermore. And by doing this, they will worsen bad income distribution, which I think will undermine the very fabric of this society. I would like to start finishing by giving an example of the kind of institution at a European level that works very well. And this is the European Investment Bank, which is a massive, it's much bigger than the World Bank or any of the regional development banks. It's a public bank of the EU, and it pools the capital of 28 member states, therefore can raise money on the financial markets very, very cheaply, and can fund very important, valuable projects according to the priorities of the European Union. For example, it helped catalyze the funding that created the Channel Tunnel. The Channel Tunnel is such an essential investment, yeah? But the private sector couldn't have done it on its own. So they provided some catalytic value. As Will Hutton says in the book, they have financed in the UK they're about to finance 53 million smart meters that will, of course, lead to climate mitigation. They were funding a lot of venture capital in green energy. In fact, most of the venture capital in green energy has been funded by the European Investment Bank. They've helped fund Crossrail, social housing, and so on. And the problem is that if we leave the European Union, we would leave the EU. We will get a little bit of money back, about £3 billion for the capital, but we will lose access to 6 billion annual lending from the European Investment Bank in these key projects. And particularly for a conservative government, which doesn't really have a proper public development bank, it has a really teeny one, you have to look with a microscope to see it, that will just not be replaced. Labour has the very good idea of creating a national investment bank, and if it does so, it will at least replace in part what the EIB is doing. But if we don't leave the EU, then it will be even better because it will be a complement. The EIB is working with national development banks and with the private financial sector to create more wealth. And this is particularly sad for a country that has actually the lowest rate of investment in the European Union, except for Greece, which was shattered by austerity, and Portugal, which also had a lot of austerity. The UK is the third lowest investment rate in the European Union. And so therefore we desperately need this long-term patient capital that will fund the investment that is needed. And finally, in this point, the EU, as a result of the financial crisis, has launched a thing called EFSI, or the Juncker Plan, which, with resources from the EU and the European Investment Bank, is mobilizing 500 billion euros between 2015 and 2020. And if the UK were to get, it's a very large economy, a very important member of the EIB, it would get just 10% of that. We would be getting 50 billion euros in 5 years, 10 billion a year. But in fact, we're probably not going to get any of it because the EIB and FC are withdrawing from the UK, and we're losing the money, the technological know-how that it brings, the links. I mean, I'm an academic. I mean, a lot of the research I do is jointly with the European Union colleagues. A lot of the students that we get come with Erasmus programs. There's probably some here. And, you know, more than 1 million students have moved countries thanks to Erasmus. We will probably lose access to that. So I would finally I'll make just a final point, and this is that I think in particular a future Labour government cannot afford Brexit for many reasons, but I think the main one is that a Labour government has a very ambitious program, a very good program in many aspects of increasing investment in very key sectors, increasing wages and so on. And if we have Brexit, this will lead clearly to much less growth and therefore to much less tax revenue. And so it will make it very difficult for a Labour government with these ambitions, with these correct ambitions for this country, to fund it. And therefore, nor will there be enough labour force to develop new economic activities. So therefore, I think that it's particular for people who are progressive, who are close to Labour, to argue for either for staying in the EU or as soft a Brexit as possible, whatever that means.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'd now like to call on Jan Toporowski, who's going to go up to comment. He is a professor of macroeconomics at SOAS, author of Why the World Economy Needs a Financial Crisis. He's collaborating with PEF on a guide to understanding the Bank of England. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. I won't take up too much of your time. I will just, in particular, because it's actually very difficult to say anything particularly memorable after two such outstanding speakers. I would just say two things. One is that, of course, a lot of the praise that was showered on Keynes should rightly have been showered, as Stephanie pointed out, on Kalecki, because he was, of course, the more radical of the two. My second point really is about the role of finance and the financial system, something that I do know something about, having come from working in the city. This is indeed one of the peculiarities of the British economy, and I think what I liked about Will's presentation is that Will doesn't just say, well, we need to shift policy here and there, spend a bit more here, lower interest rates and this kind of thing. We actually do need institutional change, and the City of London is actually at the heart of it, because if you look at the function of the City of London, the social function of the City of London, the social function of the City of London has always been not the support of industry, because with the rise of the city in the late 19th century, the rise of London as an international financial centre, actually British industry goes into decline, starts to go into decline. The function of the City of London always was as a way of reinforcing social backwardness, in much the same way that, let's say, the commodity wealth of the Middle East is a way of reinforcing social backwardness in a lot of the states there, or if you want, a more a closer analogy, in much the same way that the Grimaldi family in Monaco have a link to modernity through the Monte Carlo casino. Now, what we do about it is obviously open, but we do have to do something about it. If we take the car industry, for example, in 1959, there were 11 car companies in Great Britain. All but 3 of them were British-owned. There are approximately the same number of car companies in Britain, but they're virtually all foreign-owned. This is a challenge for institutional change. Globalization is a challenge. We cannot turn our back on it. It's certainly, we have to unpack it, see it, see really what it involves, combine, as Will and Stephanie said, combine with other governments. Our government must combine with other governments that are willing to challenge it and use it not to reinforce a backward social, semi-feudal social hierarchy, but a meritocracy, and to power an industry which can provide a decent living for everyone in this country. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much, Will. It's amazing.